Okay, welcome everybody, wherever you are in the world, and whether you're watching this session live with us here, or whether you're watching it in recorded format. I'm excited to say we have probably our best ever turnout for a workshop. More than 330 people registered today, and I think that's probably testament to the fact that digital materials and the tools, the processes, and the workflows that are used to create them are one of fashion's hottest topics today. So whether you're just starting out on your journey to experiment with 3D design and simulation, whether you reach the stage where you're translating that into a more all-encompassing digital product creation, digital transformation strategy, your demand for kind of flexible, adaptable, interoperable, powerful digital fabrics that correspond to real manufacturable materials is about to increase. There's a real potential bottleneck for the industry here in terms of how it creates digital fabrics, digital materials to the level of quality, fidelity that it needs them, to the scale that it needs them, and in a way that corresponds directly to their manufacturable physical counterparts. All of which leads to the question, how does the fashion industry close that gap between virtual materials and their physical counterparts? Can we find a workflow and a set of standards that allows us to get the best of both worlds? So I'm lucky to be joined today by representatives from Adobe Substance 3D, and Cotton Incorporated. And they've been working together for quite a while now to develop a new material capsule collection that showcases precisely that kind of workflow, bringing together the best of material scanning with the best of procedural generation. And if you're at all concerned about any of the sort of material digitization terms and things that we're using here, don't be. We're going to do a bit of a grounding. Nicholas from Adobe is going to do a really good grounding for us in some of that before we get too far into the weeds. So what are we going to go through today? After this short introduction, and after my introduction to our participants and some short scene setting questions, the two teams, Cotton Incorporated and Adobe Substance, are going to provide a live demonstration of why and how they combine those two approaches to digital material creation, i.e. scan-based workflows and procedural generation workflows. And they're going to talk about how a hybrid of those two workflows could really help to unlock the levels of speed, scalability, flexibility, and creativity that the future of digital product creation in fashion is going to need. After they've done that demonstration, I'm then going to lead a bit of a panel discussion, and we're going to unpick some of the implications of what we've just seen live in the demo. You should feel free, though, at any point to ask questions through chat, and we'll try and address them as they come in, if we have the opportunity and it feels right, or depending on timing, we may reserve some of them until the end of the hour. We'll reserve some time for questions and answer sessions. We also have a poll open at the moment where we're asking the brands, specifically the brands in the audience, how they currently approach the bulk of their digital material generation. So there are options there for hardware scanning, there are options for procedural generation, and there's an option for a digital material platform, i.e. you're making use of one of many kind of digital material marketplaces to pull from. Or there's the option that your tier 2 vendors, your mills, your partners are the ones that are handling that digitization. The answers are abstracted and anonymous. If you have a perspective there, it'd be great if you share it because it might help color some of the questions that we ask later on as we get into the structured discussion portion. For now, I want to introduce my guest for today very quickly. So I'm joined by Catherine Absher. Catherine is, she's the manager of fashion and digital design marketing at Cotton Incorporated, including Cottonworks. And I'm joined by Pauline Boiter. She's a texture artist for Adobe Substance. And I have the honor of being joined by Nicholas Paulhack, who is head of content for Adobe Substance. And I'm going to start by putting a bit of a question to Catherine. And I'm going to say, Catherine, could you give us an overview of how the partnership between Cotton Incorporated and Adobe Substance came about? And can you explain a little bit about why Cotton Incorporated is forging ahead in digital materials and digital product creation in the first place?
Absolutely. So a huge part of our mission at Cotton Incorporated is to help companies develop cotton products, particularly apparel and home goods. And one of the ways we do that is by developing innovative and inspirational fabrics to help brands imagine how they could be using cotton. Since 2020, we've been creating digital twins of those fabrics, which we offer for free download on our website, Cottonworks. We're always looking for ways to provide resources to the industry. And when we came across the Adobe Substance Suite, we were excited about the possibilities because, as I think you'll see today, a substance material goes beyond just a digital twin. It's a digital tool that lets you imagine a fabric in so many different ways. So we reached out to Ben, to the Interline, for an introduction to the Adobe team, and together we started thinking about how the substance tools could be applied to fabrics that could be manufactured. And the pilot project that we're showing today is the result.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Catherine. Much appreciated. Nicholas, from your side. Now, before we get too deep into the specifics, because I know we're itching to demonstrate the capsule collection here, and we're itching to demonstrate the workflow, I want to make sure everyone's sort of fully up to speed with a couple of things. One, what falls under the Adobe Substance Suite. It's specific to digital materials. And two, I think, how those two different approaches to creating digital materials that we talked about, how they differ. What does a scan-based workflow look like versus a procedural one? We've had some answers to the polls. We've already had a good amount of people take part, and I think 46% of them so far are saying that the bulk of their workflows are based on hardware scanning. So that seems to be the preferred option here. I know you've got some presentation materials here. You've got something you want to talk about. So I'll hand over to you to give us a bit of an introduction, a bit of a grounding in Substance and in those two workflows.
Thank you very much, Ben. Hello, everyone. I hope you're hearing me all right. Let me just share my screen very quickly because I've got a little bit of material to share just for people who may not know what is Adobe Substance. I've got a little presentation to show. You should be seeing that. All right. So what is Adobe Substance? Adobe Substance is basically the 3D at Adobe. It's an ecosystem of apps and content for digital material authoring and 3D texturing. We provide a suite of tools to create digital materials, to texture assets, and to intuitively populate and stage 3D scenes. So with Substance 3D, you can create your own materials, and these materials have key values for your digital chain. First, they are photorealistic and true to life, which are desirable quality to get the hyper-realistic level of detail that you need at various stages of the chain, whether it's from design and marketing. And you can create those materials in several ways. You can create them from scratch, fully procedurally, using your R tools, and from real-life materials with scan and even single picture. And so you can drop pictures taken with your iPhone in the application. It will turn automatically into a digital twin that is closely matching the original surface of the material. Or you can import any set of images from a scanning device and post-process it with our tools, with a large set of filters and content. You can combine qualities like accuracy of the real-life materials with the flexibility that you can get from a single scan. But our materials are not only photorealistic, they are parametric. It means that you can expose parameters, desirable parameters, unique to each materials, and they can be edited to create an infinite variation of your fabric and materials. And here's a quick overview of our system. It is uniquely connected to Adobe Creative Cloud. It's composed of 4 applications and content. You can create material using Designer, our most advanced procedural authoring tool, or to digitize your content using Sampler or Digitizer Toolbox. You can then paint those materials onto 3D objects using Substance Painter. And finally, you can bring your textured assets, but also models, materials, and lights directly into Stager, which is our tool to assemble and render a 3D scene. In addition to this application, we also have content. Our Substance 3D Assets library contains everything you need on the shelf to set up a scene. If you do not want to start from scratch, we have more than 15,000 assets covering a large range of industries, including collection dedicated to, of course, fashion and apparel and textiles and print execution. All these materials are created internally by my team and Pauline, who is with us today, which are expert technical artists. And they are all parametric, whether they are fully procedural or scan-based. And this is, of course, where you'll find the collection we created together with Catherine and Cotton Incorporated. All right. Our ecosystem is also uniquely connected to a large system of partners. You can easily use substance materials and their parameters directly in apps like Clo or, for example, or Broadware or any other tool. And even within Illustrator, for example, as you can see here, to test and drive ideas of digital sketch applying realistic materials earlier into iteration phases. Sorry. And to showcase how the ecosystem can be represented in a simple fashion digital workflow, you would start on the left with sketching earlier in the design process using Illustrator and Photoshop, applying already Substance 3D materials to create realistic concepts. And the goal here is to save time and to be efficient in conveying ideas of design. But then it's the material authoring phase where using Sampler or Designer, you can digitize content for your entire pipeline, or you can download ready-to-use content on the 3D Assets library. Moving on to the next stage, which is about 2D and 3D design, how materials and shape converge together. You can apply 3D Substance 3D materials and edit them natively, including their parameters into Clo directly onto your outfit and into other applications. If you want to go further in terms of texturing, you can also bring your assets into Painter and apply directly on 3D objects, advanced brushes, decals, and smart materials, and create iteration loops between the two applications until you find the great result that you're seeking and to create all those differentiators for your product. And finally, you can visualize your creation directly into Clo or Painter or any rendering engine, actually. Materials will always look the same, and that's a great value of Substance materials. And if you want to go even further, you can set up a scene and render it in Stager for lifestyle shots, for example. So that concludes my very, very brief veneer presentation of what is Substance. Now I would like to focus on a short introduction before leaving the mic to the demonstration of Pauline and Catherine about what is, in essence, the collaboration with Cotton Incorporated. And at first, it's very and foremost, it's a partnership, and it's about finding how to combine both expertise to design substance materials from existing reference in the Cotton Incorporated portfolio and create digital twins with them. And it deals with leveraging the different techniques, as was explained before by Ben, the existing with Substance to create digital twins that encapsulate those key properties we seek into these type of content, which is about accuracy, proportion, photorealism, everything that professional at every level of the process will need to build a proper digital chain. But beyond these values, we went further on leveraging the benefits of substance specifically. And this is about enabling new opportunities in terms of workflow. Like, what does it mean in terms of digitization at scale, and what are consequently some of the savings, both in terms of resources and time during the processing of this of these assets, and most interestingly, the creative opportunities that lie behind that for design purposes, in terms of how the digital space open new opportunities to and new flexibilities for designers to express themselves and creative to be even more creative and to experiment beyond what would be possible in real life, and consequently providing savings in terms of how many prototypes you do, and therefore having an impact in terms of sustainability globally.
Nicholas, I know you're keen to get over to Pauline's demonstration and things. So we've got a couple of questions that I wanted to just see if we could address
Sure.
before we go too far. One is, can we explain the difference between a procedural approach and scanning a material? Can we be as basic as we can here? Because I think there's some confusion around where the two differ. So scanning a material is, I can field that bit, as you might imagine, is capturing the aesthetic and the physical properties of a fabric by placing it in either a dedicated scanner or using one of the methods of more quick digitalization to accurately reflect the way that it looks, to create kind of create normal maps, displacement maps, these kinds of things that allow you to accurately reflect the full characteristics and the full composition of a fabric digitally, taking in the physical source. Would one of you from the Adobe side, Nicholas or Pauline, would you just give us a really quick, I know it's a hard question, but a quick overview of what is meant by procedural generation?
Yes, of course. Procedural generation is entirely digital, meaning that it's a generation of the visual attributes of a surface using Substance Designer, which is a graph, a node-based graph generation tool, which enables, thanks to algorithm and filters, to create effects that then becomes a texture, or the several components of a texture, like the color, the roughness, the specular, the height, and the normal, and these algorithms combine to create these aspects. And so a procedural generation is a creation from scratch into a digital app, such as Substance Designer, of the components of a material.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nicholas. That's great. I apologize if my microphone is sounding a little scratchy to people. I had a last minute change of hardware just before we started. I will try and change back to my previous setup during Pauline's demonstration so that it comes across clearly. But that's fine. That's a really good answer to that question, I think. And then the other question we had was around, can physical production keep up with virtual creativity? Because if we're talking about creating numerous options, experimenting, taking advantage of creative empowerment in the virtual space, the question then is how that factors into the physical supply chain. How do we guarantee that materials will be able to be produced? Can the physical supply chain keep up with that creativity?
And that's a very interesting question, actually. Perhaps I would ask that question in a different way, because you can virtually do anything in the digital space, and in a way that we are not bound to any types of visibility. And so the way I would put the question is how much, skills and specific criteria do you build into your digital twin or digital assets, so that you secure and you make sure that throughout its life at the different stage of the digital chain, you retain that feasibility. But we see already very interesting areas of connection where the loops somehow is closing in how the digital space inform the real world. And so potentially how you can retrieve patterns and motifs and structures that were created procedurally in the digital space, and how that can influence how materials are produced. And so there's, of course, a lot of development expected here at some point. For instance, how materials created in the digital space could influence 3D printing, for instance, and the new technologies that gets involved more and more industry segments can change the way designers and people work, in each of these industry. And I think the fashion industry will also benefit from this kind of technology at some point, if it's not already.
Perfect. That's a great answer, Nicholas. Thank you. I'll let you get back to your presentation flow, and then over to.
All right, I was nearly finished, so we can allow as much time as we can to Pauline and Catherine. So this is basically the results of this test project. It's completely free and available on the Adobe Substance 3D Assets library. And it's a collection of 13 parametric materials that are available in the Substance format. It was, of course, created, in partnership with Pauline and Catherine. And just a few words about the process, because it's sort of an echo to your previous question. We created not only one version but two versions of each materials, and this purpose was to illustrate that there's not only one way to achieve a single result. And so we created to use those two versions to illustrate two different approaches. Of course, the commonality between those two approaches are that the processing was done into Substance application. The first technique is, of course, scanning. We started with captured map from real samples from the collection of Cotton Incorporated. And of course, the second technique we decided to create was the entire procedural generation, thanks to the very high skills of Pauline. And there are benefits to both techniques, but I think what is the most important here is that they are complementary to each other. And before giving the hand to Pauline, I will try to showcase a few of them. So thanks to the Substance apps, they can be combined, this procedural and scan technique, to save resources in the making of digital twins. And the creative opportunities and the logistic opportunities are very, very wide. So first is about, what are the properties that define both technique. Scan is a guarantee of a certain level of accuracy. However, there's some limitation to the definition and the size of the elements that you capture. And procedural has much more freedom in that case. And what's interesting here is that the combination of both can potentially provide an additional level of details to a scan surface, so that it gets more realistic or closer to the way it should look in a real life. And it's not about choosing just one or the other, but just embrace the fact that you can get the best of both worlds. even reproducing, like not adding only details, but reproducing effects that are just not scannable, and it happens sometimes. Another great benefit of Substance is that you can expose parameters. And so if you create a material, whether it's scan or procedural, you can add a level of proceduralism on top of everything. And one of them is, of course, color. So you can create masks to isolate, colors. And in that case, this is a polyester element within the structure. And think about the opportunities here about color becoming a variable in this equation. The resource saving that you could think in terms of logistic when scanning hundreds and hundreds of different scans in a portfolio, being able to limit, the amount of samples to scan to just one in whatever color it is, because you know that the dozens or maybe hundreds of colors it comes in can be added digitally afterwards. And the time saving here is just tremendous. And in addition, of course, it's also a great experimentation playground where you can hint and design your next collection of colorways and color and material design, not having to produce everything in the real world, but just going into testing what would look like the next color combination, and just focusing on producing the ones that you like, cost-free, because iterating in the digital space it's much cheaper than making it in real life. And going beyond is probably the ultimate combination here, is choosing in the digital chain where you integrate the procedural elements and where you give the level of freedom, making a combination like this examples you will see a little bit later on about a scan fabric structure and potentially procedural patterns overlay that would be printed on top of it, creating this pattern procedurally so that it mimics the way the print sort of combines together with the fibers, but also have this possibility of changing this pattern or experimenting with several ones, even importing one that was designed into Illustrator. And to reflect back on what Catherine was saying at the very beginning, it's a design tool really at this point.
Perfect.
All right,
Nicholas, I know you're coming to the end of your session. We've had a question that a few people have echoed, which is, and this is from Sergio, since we're talking about creating digital twins in terms of materials, how does Substance handle mechanical properties like thickness, bending, etc.? Those kinds of properties that are used in Clo and Browseware. Are we talking solely about visual representations of materials here, or are we talking about those physical properties as well?
We're talking about the look and feel, indeed, of the sort of visual properties of the material only here. Don't want to be misleading here, and that's where it's so important to be able to see Substance as the complementary tool to tools like Clo and Browseware, where you can include those mechanical properties that are linked to the weight of the fabrics and how it is assembled on the model. One thing that is very important as well with the Substance 3D materials is the fact that it incorporates metadata from the very beginning, and that's very important because the Substance format is a standard in a way that since it works in many different applications, including those metadata early on when you're scanning every sample in the portfolio, you have the possibility to add that into this container which will grow and continue along the process. And that's where you can incorporate elements that can be useful to retrieve later on in other apps and in other parts of the workflow.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Nicholas. I'll let you carry on. I know we need to move on to Pauline's demonstration. There's another question. There's another question I'd like us to that we may get a chance to loop back to afterwards. If we don't get a chance to go to your question, folks, we'll be sure to put it to everybody via email afterwards. So there's definitely going to be an opportunity to have all the questions answered. But I'm keen that we kind of showcase this workflow in action now. So Pauline, I'll hand over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm really stressed out, so I'm sorry if it's a bit chunky as a presentation, but I'll try my best. Let me first share my screen. You should be able to see Sampler right now. And in Sampler, we're gonna first set up a bit of a cloth mesh just so we can see better the material. And as you can see, I already have a few materials that were selected in the collection that we created. And you can, of course, add all the materials that you want, but let's have a look at, nope, that scan one. Let's have it load a little. It kind of loops back at the question we had before with the kind of difference in between the procedural and the scanned version. Here you have the scanned version, and as you can see, it presents here with a few presets that are already made, but you can totally change colors from both. Here there's two sets of colors. So there's the base cotton material and the little polyester nips. So you can change both of those colors. But yeah, that is pretty much it. That's pretty much all you can do using the scanned version. And that's already a good thing if you just want to like have a look at what possible colors, collection colors could be. That's already a good base. But you are very quickly stuck with those, with the fact that the scanned are image based, and so the information on the structure of the fabric, for example, is pretty much stuck in time. So you will be able to change the look and feel, the overall appealing of the fabric, but not really the structure and how it is made, basically. So now let's have a look at the procedural one. Let's load it up. And in that case, you'll see that we have not only the two colors that we can change. So here is the basic version, the first one that we have. And so here, yeah, you can totally change both the colors from, here again, the cotton and the polyester. But you can also add or decrease the number of little polyester nuts that you can see inside. So as you can see here, it goes from 0 to 1 and basically changes the amount. Here, the amount was discussed and chosen directly with Catherine, because you basically don't have any limits. You could go to basically 0 to whatever number you would like, but we had to be careful with the feasibility, and so we had to discuss what's the quantity that we should have that could be replicated in the real world, because the idea was like really to stick to the real materials, so not to go crazy with all the parameters, because it wouldn't be, if people would buy the product based on that image and wouldn't be able to get the same thing in physical, that wouldn't make sense. So the idea was like to keep always in mind that we can for sure add all the parameters that we want, but we have to stick with what's really possible to do. And so, yeah, that was a bit of a challenge because we're usually like, what can we do more? And here was like, okay, we actually can't do that, so let's do that and decrease a bit all the parameters that we could have. Those two versions, the scanned and the parametric, are the most basic, if I can say, materials. But we also had a printed version that was really interesting because not only you could play around with the base materials. So as you can see here, if I put the colors to white, as you can see here, you have the base materials. So it's 3 threads that you can change the colors. So let's imagine we have a blue one. Let's pick a bright color so that we can see. So yeah, as you can see, it changes quite a lot. And that is just the base structure. So once you set up that base, let's go back to the gray because the paint goes really bright. You can now change 2 of the printed colors. So here's the first one. And here's the second one. That's a bit too bright. And that way, you can actually change all the colors. But you can do that with the scanned version too. For the scanned version of that material, you can also change all the colors, and exactly the same idea with the first scan material. But on that one, you can both change colors and the pattern. Here we have the basic line pattern, and there's already a bit of changes that we can tweak. So, for example, we can change the amount of lines that we want, if we want more or less. We can change the width of the pattern. And also there's a bit of warp. So you can either get really straight lines or a bit of warp and it gets wobbly. And once again, since there is slub in the base material, you can tweak that too. So it changes both the base material texture, and it affects also the paint on top, because the paint is not like a thick layer. It's basically something that you can kind of see through. So it affects both of them. For that material, you can also add a custom pattern input. So here it's the lines. It's basically the same as the physical sample. But you can also input, any kind of pattern. So we can try that, for example. So as you can see here, it's not even a black and white pattern. You can basically put any images and it will create a mask with the lighter color being interpreted as white and the darkest interpreted as black. So it creates the mask like that. So yeah, you can either add an image, or as you just saw earlier, you can actually paint directly on the texture, and it already tiles, so you don't even have to like be careful with the tiling of your pattern or whatever. So yeah, it is quite nice. I mean, I like that tool a lot. It's really fun. And so yeah, just like that, you can create pretty much any pattern that you want and try anything. You can combo the images and the paint over it. So yeah, but that is what happens after the material is done. Before that, there's a whole process to like create the material for it to work that way. I'm sure everybody knows it, but it has to be said. So yeah, that's pretty much what you can get using those techniques.
Thank you. Thanks, Pauline. Thanks for showcasing that. And I think Catherine, you wanted to show some of these fabrics taken into a flow workflow, onto a garment. If we have time for that, we can still go over to that. We do have a question though, which is around what. I'm trying to kind of aggregate a few questions here, but the question is around sort of if you take scan base, you then apply this sort of procedural generation to it. The question becomes how do you guarantee that is producible? How do you guarantee that that's a material that you can then say, well, I want this composition, I want this, I want it to look like this, and I want to make that request of my material suppliers. So I'm trying to synthesize a few questions together, but they're essentially I think people are essentially saying the value of bringing together scan and procedural from a visual perspective is very strong. The question then of how you then take that into production once the procedural generation is done on top. Is there anything that you want to add around there, Pauline and Nicholas?
Well, I would say it's kind of a real issue, because the thing is, here we had to actually work together with Catherine, because I had to understand what was feasible or not. And there's a lot of things that depend on the physical, technical issues that I don't really know about. So we really had to kind of find an in-between. And I'm not sure actually that we could have done everything that we did if we didn't have physical samples, or at least part of it, because if the technical issues is like the colors or the kind of finish, I don't think it really is an issue, because pretty much do whatever we want with colors, I think. So yeah, I think it's more about the structure that we need the actual physical thing to create the digit double. I'm not sure we could do it the other way around. I'm not sure. Maybe it has been done before, but I'm not sure it would be. We would have the best results. Not sure. Don't know.
So perhaps if I can just add one thing to Pauline, that's a very, very interesting question. It was at the very heart of the partnership around this collection, and I believe to the question, how do you maintain this relationship with the feasibility? I believe it's the same thing that it happens at the moment with the real world. You test it and you ask. In the case, information are already available at the supplier or with the manufacturer. I think those information can be retrieved and will definitely guide how the substance or the digital twins in a way is designed. So I would say the key element is the technical know-how, and this is, I'm sure of it, the thing we have so much of within the fashion industry, expertise on how things are made and what are the capabilities of a textile. When it comes to experimentation that's never have been experimented, there's always a level of trial and error. Digital is not going to solve that. Digital is going to enable the possibility to test many things without spending resources, and being able to simplify, amplify the quantity of those trials and errors, and limit the impact on the budget. When it comes to known technical properties, it's always a matter of there's several users within the digital chain, and users can be guided into what is possible and what is not. For instance, and please correct me, Catherine, if I'm wrong, one of the key goals at the very beginning of the project was to design those parameters. And because, you know, our tools can do so much, we wanted to add many of them because you could control virtually everything. But that's where the expertise of the making is so important, is to be able to make those key choices, you know, when you scan and what you add on top of this scan on the procedural aspect, and making sure that, you know, this parameter is exposed and available for people to tweak within a certain range, and you can create that. And so that's a level of IP that gets into the digital space that makes you control the type of content that you're bringing to your process, to make sure that you're controlling what's possible and what's not, and when there is an opportunity for exploration, that you can first set some boundaries, or have the possibility to iterate as much as you want before taking a decision.
Yeah, I think that's all true, and I think, you know, I was very interested in trying to see with this partnership where the native digital type workflows could start to kind of speak with the native physical workflows, and, you know, what those two processes could start to gain and learn from each other. And I think, of course, you know, because the digital tools are so, you know, unlimited, of course it's completely possible to take an existing, you know, material and then change it so much that it really has nothing to do with that original kind of that original source. But, you know, for a lot of users in the fashion industry, that's not the type of use that they're interested in. They want to see that, you know, that one-to-one, but with the flexibility and the benefits to be able to be creative and to experiment and to try things. So I think, to me, the interesting takeaway is starting to see how defined you would have to get with those parameters, and how much expertise you would really have to bring to bear to give the right guardrails for to maintain the connection to the physical fabric.
That's a really great perspective, Catherine. And I think we're kind of changing the structure of this workshop as we go a bit organically, because there's a lot of questions coming up, and I'm keen that we try and address them. But I mean, my one question I wanted to ask, and I was going to get to it towards the end, but I think we're going to be short on time, would be how you sort of bridge not just the physical and the virtual from a software perspective, but from a brand expertise and a kind of a talent is the wrong word, but a kind of a skill set perspective. Because what you have is the ability to experiment virtually, right? You have the ability to come in and say, okay, based on this scan, from this scan base, I want to do this level of experimentation that Nicholas mentioned, none of which requires me to produce physical samples the way that I would have done before, without all the inbuilt delay, without the sustainability knock-on effects. The question is kind of, where does that freedom end? And that freedom has to have those guardrails placed on it. It has to be delimited by people within a fashion organization, or within the fashion value chain at the very least, who have that hybrid sort of skill set that bridges physical and virtual, or whether those are different people who are bringing together experience of physical and virtual. So my question, kind of an open question for all three of you, would be, what's your perspective on how those two elements can come together more kind of culturally speaking, organizationally speaking, rather than just from a tech perspective?
It's a hard one. Yeah, go ahead, Nicholas.
Okay, I'll try to give to provide an angle on this. I start to always compare the approach that that people may have within design studios and along, you know, the process. of how do you manage libraries of content. There are spaces dedicated for that. There are people managing databases, whether they are suppliers or into brands. And so this management is something that needs to happen, perhaps in a different space with different criteria of of exposure of freedom, creative freedom within the materials. What is great is that Substance offers this flexibility of being flexible to several types of workflow, and so something that could be set up, and the supplier could be transferred to a designer in a brand with either an exposed a series of presets that shows the many colors it comes in, or with pre-exposed parameters saying that plays into these boundaries and will guarantee this is feasible. This obviously requires some knowledge and skills to do so. And perhaps to come back on the questions of this profile, I think there's a critical evolution of 3D being more and more easy to grasp, but also in terms of defining its place within the process. So there's some elements where you need a very, very important expertise that could be into making a procedural version of a fabric. There's a different level of expertise in scanning, but perhaps the designers that actually creates the garments, supply the materials to their 3D objects don't need to be creating the materials themselves. If they want, it's always better. But what they want is to be the sort of difference between those profiles would be that they just consume and play with them. So a material that already has exposed parameters is something that is fairly easy to handle for anybody, and that's sort of perhaps a first level of answer to the sort of spread of the knowledge and the skills required. But of course, there's at some point a critical aspect of transferring this IP and this know-how and this uniqueness to every brand, to every process in the digital space by people that know how things are made, how this industry operates, and potentially skilled people in the digital space in 3D to be able to make that transfer.
Yeah.
It's the two kind of realms right now. They do exist really separately. You have kind of people who understand the fabric manufacturing process and exactly how all the fabrics are made, the construction down to the yarn and the fiber level. Then you have all of your dyeing and finishing types of processes and applications. But then your sort of native digital tools just represent this whole other realm of skills. And I think so far, we've really just begun to discover kind of the beginning point for where we need to start blending the two areas of expertise. And I think that fashion does have a lot to gain from people whose experience lies with the digital first or even digital only industries. As someone like myself, my background is rooted in traditional fashion design, physical creation. I learned so much from Pauline during this process. One of the major learnings for me was that the ability for fashion to begin to leverage those full benefits of fully digital workflows, it comes with the necessity to basically learn a new way of thinking. And so I think culturally, to go back to like your beginning question, I think culturally, I think that one of the most important things to have at the outset is kind of a curious outlook, and I guess, staying open and curious to the possibilities while realizing that there's a huge amount that goes on the back end of manufacturing, and that that expertise is really going to be the basis for for the processes moving forward.
Yeah, I think there's an open question in industry when it comes to digitizing fabrics at scale. There's the open question of where that takes place, right? There's the open question of who shoulders the burden of digitization. How much of it should take place at source with the fabric mills? How much of it should take place at brand headquarters? And some of that question is going to be answered by where that expertise exists. If the virtual expertise exists primarily at brand level, then what you need to have is at the very least kind of a standardized format, standardized method of data interchange, or something that allows those people on their creative side to then collaborate with the people who do have that real fabric expertise, irrespective of whether those people work for the brand or whether they work in the supply chain, whether that expertise exists elsewhere. So I see real value here in using this workflow as an example of how to sort of set that standardization, how to have that communication, that collaboration between two different skill sets, whether they exist within the same organization or whether they are in two completely different places. Okay, perfect. I know we're running a little bit short on time, but I wanted to ask another question really, which was one of our final ones. What do you folks see as being the key forces that are shaping kind of the near-term future of digital materials and digital product creation in general? Now, I'm slightly biased because the Interline is going to be publishing our digital product creation report in November, so we're going to be talking about this. But I'd love to get your perspective on, even if we sidestep this sort of workflow and we talk more generally around why digital product creation, why digital materials at scale, at the right fidelity are so important to fashion. I think that would be a good place to end. Now, I also want to make sure that everybody knows there's a lot of technical questions that have been asked, and we definitely don't have time within this hour to get to all of those. For me, that's a testament to just how much expertise there is in this area and how much interest and investment there is in this area. So if we haven't got to your question, and I know there's a lot we haven't, we'll pick up all of these and we'll try and address as many of them as we can via email. We'll assign them to the right people from here. We'll see if there are other people who can help address those questions. But I want to leave us with a bit of an impression of where everybody feels digital product creation and material digitization is heading from here, what the near future is going to look like. Catherine, I'll ask you first because you're top left on my screen.
Well, I think one of the things that companies are finding that as they want to use more digital assets and at larger scale, the requirements for materials becomes higher, and the strategies that might work, that work to get those materials may not be the same, from like a small experimentation to a wider implementation. We came across this certainly when we started implementing 3D models into the Cottonworks website. When it was sort of one thing when we were just doing fabric files for download, but then when we wanted to use the interactive models online, our needs were different, and I think this is a really common experience. And so from what I've seen so far, procedural creation and this type of workflow, it's not quite on people's minds yet, but I think the possibilities are huge. Procedural workflows can be applied to materials like we've seen today, but there's also procedural modeling and like 3D modeling, and when you think about combining those capabilities with AI and generative models, I think there's a lot of potential for different ways of working and for new kinds of tools to be developed. There are already some developments that I've seen with digital materials being created or enhanced with like machine learning. And I think we're going to start to see more and more applications for these new tools and different ways of working in fashion.
Perfect. And Nicholas, Pauline, I'll come to you as a collective because I know you're both from the Adobe side. So I'll let you share your perspective together on where you feel digital product creation in fashion is headed from here, and if there's any other sort of best practices, any other kind of workflows and pipelines and things fashion could perhaps look to borrow from other industries that have maybe navigated this transition already.
I do. Sorry, you wanted to speak first, perhaps, Pauline?
I don't know. I can try to give kind of an answer, but you know, my view on this is that yeah, I totally agree with what Catherine said earlier. The whole thing needs to come from a place of curiosity, and I think as soon as people will kind of see the possibilities that are available using the tools, are willing to, there is kind of an effort to make to like get a step in, and that is usually usually speaking, I mean, I had the opportunity, the great opportunity to work for Louis Vuitton for a while, and the most difficult thing for people that I was working with was like, yeah, but I've been working that way for ages, and it works pretty fine, and I don't need any other tool to do that thing that already works. Like, if it's not broken, don't replace it. But sometimes it needs just a tiny bit of you know, you save some time for someone once, and then someone else is like, okay, but I do need to do that quick too. Can we do that pretty fast? And it was mostly, you know, color changes and kind of quick renders that had to be, we needed like a bit of variation in a very short amount of time. And in that way, people saw pretty quickly that you just have to basically move a slider and wait a few seconds for the render to come out. But I think people need to be curious. People need to have, you know, that way of thinking of like, okay, maybe that's a better or maybe another way to do what I already do with those tools. And I think basically, yeah, you just need that. You just need to be curious and be willing to make the tiny effort to look into it. You'll see the time you can save. And yeah, I'm like, I really love like the possibilities that give the tools. I started this as a hobby at first, so you know, it's basically I'm totally preaching for my own church or whatever. So yeah.
What can I add? All right. Yeah, I obviously agree with everything that Catherine and Pauline said. I think the main drivers of change are modeled on the way people consume, and those trends, changing the way that we industrialize and bring products to users, and what kind of experiments and new experience, both in terms of the what, but also in the speed and the cadence of consumption, is pushing the industry to shift towards quicker, easier opportunity. And I think digital is not going to save all the problems. It will just enable to follow the trends and to adapt to the way people consume content, and generating those images, videos, and immersive experiences is a key for the way people now sort of look at consuming content in general, whether it's shop looking at the largest offer of concepts and styles and things like this, browsing through the trends to actually the actual shopping experience. So I think this will drive the change of the manufacturing and the process. And I think one of the key drivers, to come back to your question, is going to be how creativity gets involved in this. Because people don't buy clothes just because it's visible. They buy it because there's a style, there's an edge to it, and so being able to express creativity has always been one of the key elements to pushing the envelope further in terms of the next collection and then the next collection. So and in that case, I think AI is going to be a great help, both in terms of sheer logistics, like how many variations, how many iteration of a single design can I generate, or can I pick these iterations from something that was pre-calculated for me, or can I just at another level be inspired by AI that will make some choices for me, and I will pick the one I like best. These are very similar, but two different ways of looking at this opportunity. And I think this will help for creativity, but also help in terms of logistics, because how do those things get automatically converted to the assets that are part of this digital change. So at the moment, tools are getting more and more simpler to use. That's a fact. But there are still things that can be automated, can be improved, and I think in that realm there's going to be a lot of barriers falling down in the coming years to simplify this workflow.
Perfect. And I know we're still imposing on people's time here who have other things that they need to get to. So I'm gonna bring us to a close. And I'm gonna say thank you to everyone that's joined. Thank you to everyone that's asked some really incisive questions. I think it's become clear from this session that there's a huge hunger here to know more. There's a huge hunger to unpick the implications. There's a huge hunger to talk about how digital materials factor into the supply chain in general. And everybody who has a question that we haven't got to, we'll do our very best to address this and share it with everyone when we're done. I'll chat to the Cotton Incorporated and Adobe teams, and we'll figure out the right way to do that. But there was a huge amount here, and I think the lesson is next time we need a whole day workshop rather than just an hour to get through this kind of topic. But I mean, to Catherine, Nicholas, especially to Pauline for the demonstration, thank you so much for your time. And I will. Everyone who's invested in this topic, please do check out Cottonworks. Please do check out Adobe Substance, the entire suite. And selfishly, keep an eye out in November for the Interline's digital product creation report, because we've got a lot more to say on this topic too.
Thank you very much, Ben.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. Okay, perfect. So this is a bit of an extended cut for everybody who tuned into our workshop. So collectively, the Interline, Adobe Substance 3D, Cotton Incorporated, we ran a live workshop where we shone a spotlight on a new kind of hybrid workflow that incorporates some of the best of scan-based working, procedural generation, and we considered some of the overall implications of that for the digital material space in general and for digital product creation as a whole. That was a really well-attended session with a lot of engagement. So rather than try and take everybody's questions piecemeal and address them in an email directly to people, we had a request to try and make sure that everybody who attended the live session, anybody who now goes on to watch this later on demand when it becomes more generally available, that everybody benefits from the output of all of those questions. So collectively, myself, Catherine from Cotton Incorporated, and Nicholas and Pauline, we decided to sit together a few days later, hence the change of clothes that you'll see between these two chapters. But we decided to sit down and we wanted to talk through some of these questions. We wanted to tackle some of the subjects that came up in the live workshop session. And we wanted to talk a bit more around some of the implications, maybe clarify some points, consider some more themes from that. So you're now seeing us tackle some of these questions in a follow-up session. And I think the place that we really wanted to start was with a a very simple definition of the difference between a scan-based material creation workflow and a procedural generation workflow, because I think there was a question that came up a couple of times in the live session, and it's one that I want us to pin down before we go any further. So, Nicholas, I know you've got some thoughts on this. What would you define as the simplest way of explaining what constitutes a scan-based material creation workflow, what constitutes a procedural generation workflow, and when we talked about hybridizing those two things, what does that look like?
Sure, I'll try to be as quick and as simple as possible. The scan generation process is about capturing a physical sample using, different processes, but basically it's photographs of the sample that gets digitized and creating a final digital material. So all the visual attributes that represents the surface. In comparison, the procedural workflow is about building using algorithm the same visual properties that mimic or simulate the visual properties of a fabric. But thinking about it, the procedural aspect is everything that comes from adding effects that cannot be scanned potentially, and other elements that are not present on the actual sample. And so thinking about hybrid processes, it's exactly that. It's combining the best of both worlds to get some results that you cannot achieve with either one of the techniques without extended amounts of work. But that would be the comparison of both processes in a nutshell.
Okay, perfect. And I think that clarifies things from my side. If there's anything, Catherine and Pauline, if there's anything you want to add to that, feel free, or you want to jump in at any point as well, please do go for it. If there's any point that you'd like to try and clarify for the audience. One of the follow-up questions we had was around whether the substance tools are used more for the visual properties of materials, or whether they are used for the physical properties, or both. There were some questions about how to incorporate some of this into the physical materials workflow. So I know that substance tools are generally around creating 3D materials that are visually geared, but the substance file format can store physical properties as well. So could you just explain a little bit about the difference between the visual properties of the substance suite and the kind of more comprehensive properties of the whole SPSAR container?
Yeah, sure. So the visual properties of a substance materials is everything that leads to the look and feel of the results. And what gets into a substance material is, of course, all of these information, which is utilized for the texturing. So the application of these visual properties to a 3D object. And in addition to that, which is the specificity of substance, is the sets of parameters that potentially users can customize to create variation of these visual attributes. But the SBSAR file is also a container. It's a file format. It's the recipe of a material visual attributes, in which you can embed other information that gets embedded and carried along in other tools, but also throughout the design and production process. So into SBSAR file, you could embed what we call metadata. That could be technical information that are relevant between two different users of this texture file, and that can carry some information about how this could be used in the digital workflow, but also information from the physical world. So all the properties and reference that help synchronize elements from a library to some properties that you need to take into account when you're building or combining the visual aspect and the actual physical geometry is really important, and to be able to carry that is what makes the transition and the workflow consistent.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Nicholas. So, Catherine, I got a question for you, which would be: could you tell us a bit more about where the capsule collection and the partnership between Cotton Incorporated and Adobe Substance, where that came from, what you were trying to achieve with it, what the purpose of forging this collection together was?
Sure. So with this collaboration, we were really looking to explore what the application of the substance tools and the procedural elements could be to fabrics that could actually be manufactured. Because when I was looking into the substance tools, at the beginning, I saw a lot of different kinds of materials, but wasn't sure whether it would be possible to kind of digitally recreate something that we could actually, take into production. So we were looking into all of those possibilities and really just trying to discover, what the limits of freedom for digital materials are that can still be made in, the physical world. And I think a great result of that exploration was kind of finding this middle kind of hybrid way of working, where you can combine your, the accountability of your scan with the fabric that you've already created, and you can add this extra layer of editability and flexibility on top of that. So we had a lot of great learnings out of this collaboration, and I did want to just go back. I wanted to make sure that people understand from the question before about whether the substance tools are for physical properties or digital or visual properties. So I want to make sure people understand that using the substance toolset is not a replacement for having to do physical fabric testing using the Clo fabric testing kit or the Browseware fabric testing kit. What you can do with the substance tool set is you can edit or recreate the surface appearance, the visual kind of the visual appearance of the fabric using the substance tools, and the SBSAR format can be a container that you can put the data the physical property data that you generated using the testing kits. You can store that in the SBSAR format, but it's not going to be a replacement for doing that testing.
Okay, perfect. That makes a lot of sense. And Nicholas, Pauline, is there anything from the Adobe side about kind of where this partnership came from and what you've been able to realize from it? What you think the key kind of takeaways and the key benefits are?
Yeah, sure. I think this was very, very insightful for defining an approach to creating materials that are designed for a manufacturing and a design workflow and pipeline. Because virtually with digital tools and substance tools, you can create materials in any way you want. The key thing was to identify what was relevant within a specific use case, such as understanding how can we guarantee the feasibility of the materials, what were the properties for which we wanted to play with from a creative aspect, like what can change and how much it can change compared to what cannot change and what has to be controlled and limited. And so this partnership was very, very interesting in that way, because what Catherine gave us is the limits in which we could play and we could define the materials, and in that way it's the perfect example of a digital asset that could work for that specific fabric or collection of fabric. Of course, it could be different depending on workflows, but I think one of the key learnings we had is that it's always a combination of two levels of expertise coming from the manufacturing and design on one side, and the transformation and the mastering of the tools, of the digital tools, to transfer that sort of IP from the physical world to the digital world.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Thank you. And I think one of the other key questions that came up was around kind of placing trust in digital materials, because you essentially have two potential workflows, right? You have one that is digital for digital, where you're using digital tools and processes with a digital output. What you have for the most part in fashion, though, is outside of kind of metaverse considerations and things, you have an industry that is using digital tools and digital methods to create a physical end output. And I think there's some of the questions were around, well, how do we start to translate some of the benefits of procedural generation, some of the other kind of things that have traditionally been used in digital for digital, and make them viable and make them applicable, and to bring those into a digital for physical workflow, making sure that the two don't become separate streams, don't diverge too far. If anyone's got any more thoughts to share on that, they'd be welcome.
Well, I think Nicholas was just speaking to, a good part of that. So I think that it, placing, different amounts of trust in your digital material, it depends on setting limits to kind of define the boundaries of freedom, so that you can, give creative agency and, different capabilities to the people who are designing, but the right capabilities and the right amount of freedom, so that you can really play within the boundaries of what is physically achievable. And I think too, the more that kind of the deeper that you want to get into that, when it comes down to, playing at kind of like a color and print and kind of surface level, if you want to get to the next level deeper into any parameters of the actual, the fabric and the yarns that are being used and the structure, the further down you are interested in going there, the more you're going to need that sort of that interdisciplinary team where you can really bring together the expertise with the physical manufacturing and R&D with the digital native tools. And I think, we really just started to kind of scratch the surface of, how that could be done, and, what it would take to actually start to make those kinds of things happen with this collection. But, we're exploring, and we're, trying to figure out new ways of working. So
no, that's a great point. Yeah, no, and I think that's something a lot of the audience for the live session, this extended version afterwards, that's a lot of, they're asking a lot of similar questions and doing a lot of similar exploration themselves as well. And I'm keen, to articulate from the Interline's point of view, none of this is 100% a solved problem when it comes to how to integrate the benefits of digital for digital into digital for physical, for example. These are things that the industry is wrestling with as a whole, and that's why, for me, from the Interline's perspective, this capsule collection is so interesting, is because it spotlights that kind of experimentation. It starts to say, well, what would it mean to take tools that are tailored to this and to make them fit into this, to start to extend their benefits into new areas that fashion can start to take advantage of over time. I think one of the questions that came up a couple of times, or a couple of questions rather, were quite directly addressed at the substance suite itself, the substance tools. What can they do for me? So I'm keen that we not ignore that, but I want to sort of segment it out here. maybe if we could just have a quick overview, if we were to say, well, what are the immediate applications of the Substance Suite? If I'm not already working in Substance to do any kind of material authoring, I'm not already working in Substance Stager to do any virtual photography or whatever it might be. If this is my first exposure to the Substance Suite, what are the immediate kind of applications? What does it allow me to do to kind of, you know, bridge between design programs? I start to reach another endpoint. What does it mean to allow me to do that sort of experimentation? So I guess it's a question for you, Nicholas, and or Pauline, is if this is my first exposure to Substance, what could it do for me?
Well, I think the simplest thing that Substance tools can provide is the possibility to digitize materials, and this can be done in using two different techniques that we described before. But what I would say is that it's an agnostic tool that allows you to gather captures from scans that can come from, you know, many different sources. Either you scan it yourself, or you get it from suppliers, or you get from another team, and to transform it, you know, efficiently into a workable digital materials that you can apply to your design concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the first level, like creating your library, being able to work with a unified set of digital assets that, you know, are ready to be utilized throughout your workflow, whether you're using Clo, Brotherware, or Blender, or even Maya, or any other, you know, real-time tools such as Unity and Unreal Engine. This is giving you the possibility to do that. And after that, you can, you know, progress beyond in you know, potentially creating your own additional combinations of materials. That's perhaps the second stage. And then even beyond that, you can create what you are not capable of creating, you know, in real life, to experiment before you actually get into the workshop and manufacturing things. And this goes beyond and beyond. But the first and most important thing is that it gets you the possibility to do that very, very quickly.
Perfect, thank you. And I guess just to close off the question around the hybrid workflows would be, do you think the hybrid model here is something that is applicable to all sort of product and material categories, or is it something that you think will go on to exist alongside? You'll have scan-based workflows, you'll have procedural workflows, and you'll have the hybrid ones that combine elements of both, and that all of those methods will continue forward.
I think each method has some pros and cons at every level, but I think all the methods can work alongside each other. You know, if you're considering a digital chain, you know, relying on digital materials, you could have categories of materials that requires only the bare minimal scanning techniques just to get to the result that you need. And there's some others which have, you know, specifics in terms of, you know, structures and effects that you cannot scan, that you will need to combine scan and procedural. And perhaps other types of materials that you deem worthy of having a complete, fully procedural version of it, because either that's something that you're using 99.9% of the time, and so that you need some extra flexibility. And so because of these reasons, that is, you know, unique to every user, might need to invest the time to create a fully digital twin. But I think all of these sits together, you know, at certain times and points in the material library and the digital chain itself, because, you know, design, manufacturing are two key steps, but there are other ones, you know, before and afters, that can rely on digital materials as well.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
Sorry, no, that's okay. I think that, to me, one of the main benefits of kind of working this way is that it allows you so many possibilities to tailor the workflow to exactly your needs. And those needs might be different, you know, between like different companies or different product categories or different material categories. All of that might be different. And, you know, as Nicholas mentioned, for a lot of brands, a lot of materials are repeated year over year. You've got little adjustments and versions of the same thing. And I think that that kind of application is where your procedural benefits really start to provide efficiencies. And so I think some questions to ask, you know, when trying to figure out what the right workflow is, you know, like how much flexibility do you need with the material? How much flexibility can you feasibly have with that material? How long are you going to use it? You know, to what, like how much would, if you invested more time in creating a tool out of that material, how much use would you get out of that tool? And then ultimately, what are your end goals and uses for the output of that material?
I think that's a really good way to describe it, is turning material into a tool. Because when you start to think about generating on top of something and adjusting parameters on top of something within well-established guardrails, what you're talking about is effectively kind of evergreen fabrics. You're talking about things that are going to be part of collections conceivably for quite a long time, but with relatively minor adjustments. You know, adjustments to band, adjustments to colors, the kinds of things that historically you could only do through physical experimentation. The kinds of things where you would have to say, I will go and talk to my tier 2 supply chain, I will ask them if it's possible to do this, and I will then bring in the output of that iteration that will go through the whole Adobe approval cycle and everything else. It becomes a very, what was a very time-consuming, wasteful, unsustainable environmentally and process-wise workflow can be done digitally, provided that you have the right parameters set around it, you have the right guardrails set around it. So I really like that description of the material as a tool. I think that really zeroes in on the importance of all of this for me. One of the other big questions we had was, we talked a lot about the capabilities of Substance. We saw live demonstrations of the capabilities of Substance. I was wondering if it would be beneficial to showcase what the output of this collaboration looks like in Clo. We specifically had somebody say, how do I bring these materials into Clo 3D if I want to work with them? So Catherine, I think you'd like to show that.
Okay, so you know, a quick first note on where can you access all of this. So to get fabric files from Cottonworks, you can visit the Cottonworks website and go to the resources tab and choose the Fabricast collection. And when you get inside, you can search for digital fabrics, and the collection fabrics are all right here. This orange tricotine fabric and the next couple of fabrics here through to this natural colored tricotine. Mm-hmm. So, and then you can download your Clo or Browseware file. We're going to be showing Clo today. And then for the Substance files, you can go to Adobe Substance 3D Assets to Collections. And here is the Substance Cottonworks capsule collection. And then you can just download your SBSARs from here. So I've gone ahead and brought some of these, some of the fabrics in. So we're seeing right now, this is the original file, the original kind of scan-based workflow that we use at Cotton Incorporated currently. And I'm going to take this part of it and apply the Substance archive format here. Oh. Okay. So then we've got, so if I wanted to add a file here, then I could either just create a new fabric, or if I wanted to bring over my physics properties, I could copy this existing fabric and then change the material type from PBR to substance, and then open my file here to apply the texture. And then here's this is a different fabric. This is the substance fabric, and then this is the original version here. And then with this, we can go down to the different properties that we could play with. And let's see if we can increase the digital print. I can't see the rest of that, but let's see. Can increase this too. Can change that. We can change the warp intensity there. And then just like we could in the web player earlier, we can, we've got all these indexed colors that you can then change around. So, you can change the other color, really flexible too. Let's see. There we go. So you've still got a lot, you've got all the flexibility that you have. If you're working in the substance tools, you can do pretty much all those same things right here in Clo. So, I think a great benefit is that even if the SBSAR files might take a little bit of extra knowledge to create, you can still use the output of that work in a really easy and way that's probably already familiar to you.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Thanks for the demo there, Catherine. And I think, again, it shows what you can do when you have the right basis for creative experimentation, when you have the right basis to play around with things. Does that 100% guarantee physical achievability of the result that you create? Again, it's something that needs to be handled on a bit of a case-by-case basis. It is entirely possible to iterate on things in a way that perhaps doesn't work because one color might bleed into another in terms of production. Occasionally, I guess there are some rough edges there, but provided the right expertise is deployed in defining what you can do procedurally, what parameters you can adjust, in theory at least, and hopefully in practice, that experimentation is a lot simpler to achieve physically, and because it begins with a physical scan and then the procedural generation is applied on top of that with an understanding of what is achievable and an understanding of what can be done with that fabric. Okay, perfect. Unless there's anything else that you folks wanted to get through, I think I'd like to just pick up some of the finer points that came up from audience questions. I think we had some granular stuff that I'd like to make sure that we address. Is there anything that I've missed, Catherine, Nicholas? Is there anything you want to talk about before we get into the fine points? Perfect. Okay, excellent. So I think we had quite a few questions, and people zeroed in a lot on color spaces, critical reference viewing, these kinds of things, where people, and I think the easiest way that I could distill a lot of questions into one is that people were rightly thinking about digital color approvals. This is the way I understand the synthesis of these questions, is that people would like to, if they have a digital workflow that they then use to communicate digitally with their supply chain, and they say, well, okay, let's patent that, we want to make this material, we want to have this be achieved. They are thinking, well, could we start to approve those physical materials digitally? Could we start to actually get to that stage? And that brings up the questions about how people are viewing these fabrics, right? Whether they're draped or whether they're just flat. And that is, it's a big question, and it's sort of it's kind of beyond the scope of substance. It's beyond the scope of this partnership. But there is a big argument to be made if fashion brands start to work more closely with their material suppliers to do digital color approvals, to start to build these kinds of workflows. There's a strong argument to be made for the fact that there is an investment that needs to be made at both ends in display calibration, in display consistency, in viewing conditions, conditions and lighting, color temperature, and a lot of other things that go into being able to look at an input from one place and have it be consistent in terms of how you're judging it as an output in another place. In terms of color reproduction and color space within the software, I don't know if that's something that Nicholas and Pauline want to add anything about, but from the Interline's point of view, we have had these conversations with brands and we have had these conversations with suppliers, and we know that there is a desire to move towards approving materials digitally. Absolutely, there is investment and progress that needs to be made in how those materials are viewed, on what device they're viewed on, in what conditions, and that's a prerequisite to being able to get to digital approvals for these things. For me, that's the meat of it. I'd love to say we have the solution for this, but it's one of those things that requires people to make an investment at both ends. Unless there's anything that you folks want to add to that for the color space question, unless there's anything technical that I've missed, Nicholas and Pauline, from the substance side.
Something that has also a very much importance within the standards of the brands or the specific market segment is how do you what do you consider as being your sort of a master for reference for how to do display materials. So what types of lighting, what types of 3D scene, on which type of 3D objects will you apply materials to actually make it approvable, and this, as anything in the digital space with 3D software is possible. It's just a matter of an industry or brands and their suppliers to be aligned on the standards to make sure that they're speaking the same language. Mm-hmm. However, if I may have add something to substances, that substance materials are what we call PBR, so stands for physical base rendering, which is a standard that display materials on how they react to light, and that has consistency throughout the different surfaces on which you will apply those materials later on, whether it's in Clo, but also in real-time engine or offline renderers, and the result will be the same in each of these applications. So when you utilize substance formats in the digital space, you'll have a guarantee that all the application down the road of your digital pipeline will have this guarantee.
Okay, that is very helpful. Thank you. We also had a substance-specific question about how well software deals with transparent fabrics, laces, embroideries, chiffons, things like that. Things with any degree of transparency. So, and the question was, I think, that people have encountered issues with that in other 3D workflows and in other sort of material formats and representations.
To make a short answer, yes, fabrics can be transparent in 3D. There might be some specificities to specific fabrics, like I'm thinking about multi-layered, that would potentially sort of trigger specific workflows from material side and the geometry side at the same time. But for I think simpler transparent fabrics where you see within the in between the structure, that's a map that is embedded into the material container that actually drive what is going to be opaque and what will be transparent.
Okay, perfect. And I think there was another question around. Somebody asked us, do you have any basic training about how people can start to make? Yes.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add something regarding the last question.
Please, Pauline. Yeah, no, go for it.
Yeah, because you can totally create maps that will go like from the white is opaque and the black is transparent, and that is an opacity map, and you can do like lace really easily like that. But depending on what material you're trying to do, you're not going to want opacity. You're maybe going to need some translucency or some scattering, and it really depends on the light and how you're lighting it, and how what's the physical property of the material. For stuff like plastic and basically the plastic and like the toile, I don't know in English, but you're not usually going to use the opacity. The opacity is basically, can you see it or not? But you may have to work with translucency. It's like you can see it, but you can see through. It's not the same thing that you can see it at all. And that's two different maps, but you can pretty much add any outputs that you need using Designer or even Painter. You can add any outputs. So yeah, you can treat them all. Just not the same thing, but yeah.
And I'm going to add here, if anyone wants to see exactly what you can do with materials and substance, you need to follow Pauline on ArtStation or on Instagram. She'll show you how good you can make all those advanced effects look.
That is a very fair assessment. Yep. I've followed Pauline for a long time, and I'm consistently impressed by the wizardry that's involved. We did have a question from somebody about where would they start with basic training if they wanted to make a knit or a woven structure, and they wanted to start to, whether they're incorporating these materials, whether they're just learning the ropes to start to build towards them. Kind of how would they start that basic journey? Pauline, I don't know if you've got a take on that, or Nicholas.
Well, there is actually some tools that already exist inside Designer, and in Painter too. There is some basic weave patterns that you can already tweak. It's kind of a mini toolbox that is already in the software, and you can use it and tweak a little. For example, in Painter, but you can also like create the whole toolbox yourself using Designer, and in that case, you can pretty much decide all the rules from how many threads you're going to use and how many steps there's going to be in between the weaving, what kind of weaving pattern you want to have, or you can pretty much, using Designer is pretty much creating the tools yourself, and Painter is playing with the tools. So you can do, pretty much anything you'd like. But you can, the first, when you don't have any idea of how to do it, there's a lot of things that you can do. For example, you can just download the SBS AR from the library, but you can also download the SBS file itself and open it. And for sure, it's going to be a bit wild at the beginning, but once you understand that you read it from left to right, and you can just see like there's a box that creates a shape, and that shape is transformed, and that shape is warped, and then it is scatters, and you can go so on and so on with all the it's basically just a shape being transformed to whatever you want. So I'd say have a look at other graphs, take a look at how people do it, and you can copy paste whatever you want, keep whatever you want, and get rid of the rest. That's how I started anyway, so
That's good. That is good to know. I think we've got through all of the granular questions, really, all of the certainly the core ones that people raised. If there's anything else that anyone would like to add around, what something for people to take away, or maybe something around kind of what does this all mean? What's something that people can then go and kind of take action on? What implications might this have? How might things go from here? Then I'm happy to, if anyone's got any last words, now's the time.
Maybe just one thing. We've been talking a lot about the procedural versus scan-based workflow. And I really think it's taking the problem backwards, thinking that way, because it's two really good solutions to two different problems. The scan can be a very good solution for something where you have to have a beautiful close-up beauty shot, and that's all you need. And the procedural is really great when you have to iterate a lot and change stuff out. And mixing the two, like the hybrid version, is really great. For example, the leathers. Crocodile won't change their scales between now and in 50 years, but you can change the color of that, for example. So having a base can where the 8 map is based on photogrammetry and the color is based procedurally on a procedural base is like really there's not really a versus between those solutions because they're all very good at at solving different problems. If you can if you had to put all the solutions to all those problems, you know, the best one would rise really easily and say, yeah, that's the best solution.
I think, you know, it's like you said, in terms of like, you wouldn't want to run procedural generation to alter the scale patterns in a crocodile leather, because you know that's not physically ever going to be achievable, because it's something that's made by nature, something that turns out that way. And I think that's a good, it might be an extreme example, but it's a good example of where procedural generation begins and ends. Is you take it and you say, well, what's not going to change? What are the intrinsic properties of this material that need to remain the same in order for it to be physically achievable? What can change? What, you know, in practice, what is achievable? And color is certainly part of it. Color, patterns, all these kinds of things. These are things that can change, and procedural generation gives you a very quick way to uncover maybe unexpected ways that they might change, and things that might actually turn out to be a good part of your creative workflow.
Absolutely, and it's just a question of timing. Like, you know, people are just starting to embrace digital workflows, and soon will be, or hopefully when this gets more and more integrated, that people gets the need for a little bit more and do a little bit more with materials and change some of the properties more, and that's where that's going to be the opportunity to enhance and provide more to scan-based materials using procedural techniques.
No, that's great. Catherine, anything you want to leave us on? Anything from Cotton's perspective?
I think, you know, I would just say that, you know, we're looking into all the, you know, a lot of the issues around digital product creation, you know, just like the audience for this webinar is. You know, they're concerned about it, we're concerned about it. You know, we're trying to think through and research different ways of thinking and different ways of working. You know, I think that we've learned a lot, and we have a long way still to go. But I think, you know, from our perspective, we're just trying to discover new possibilities, and that, you know, you should try in your you know, journey towards you know, digital transformation. Try to stay flexible and open to the new ideas, even if there are still problems yet to be solved, and you know, different kinds of methods and literally different ways of thinking that you have to start to consider. So you know, reach out to us, reach out to the Interline, reach out to Adobe Substance. We're all at the end of the day, we're all looking into the same problems and looking for different ways that we can work.
Oh, that's a great place to end, and I think, not coincidentally, I think we're all contributing something to the Interline's digital product creation report, which is due out later this year, and that's a free download for anybody. So if you want to hear more from all of the parties on this, then I'd encourage you to check that out at some point. But from me, from Catherine, from Nicholas and Pauline, thanks for tuning into the live session. Thanks for watching this on demand, and well, best, you know, stay curious on your digital product creation journey. Make, as a brand, don't be afraid to kind of make demands of what it is that you want digital product creation to do for you, what it is that digital materials need to do for you. And over time, technology, integrations, processes, all of these things will catch up to what it is that the industry wants to do. But it's a collaborative effort, not just between technology companies and industry bodies, but between technology companies and brands and suppliers. Everybody is pulling in the same direction. And from me, it's exciting as somebody who's kind of observed and commented on digital product creation 3D for more than a decade. It's exciting to see so many of the pieces starting to fall into place. Is the complete end-to-end digital workflow finished and done for everybody? Definitely not. Is it progressing in the right direction? Absolutely, and I hope we conveyed some of that in this session. So thank you to everybody, and thanks to the audience for joining.